Greetings to all at Water and the FLTN. I'm Monica Maher, speaking to you from Quito, Ecuador, where I work on feminist, faith-based education and public advocacy for sexual rights and reproductive rights, a field that has been devastated by the US federal budget cuts. All of the funding for our work at the Ecuadorian Faith Network here was recently ended because of the domino effects of Trump's policies, and many other organizations in Latin America working on sexual and reproductive health and rights have also lost all of their funding. This comes at a time when many governments in this region have already slashed their own national social service budgets and increased military spending, which is the case of Ecuador. And of course, these cuts have the harshest impacts on women and girls in already underserved areas, namely indigenous territories and Afro-descendant territories. The current policies only increase the huge economic inequities. In this region, the activists and academics see this all as a reaction by transnational fundamentalisms, sociopolitical, religious, and economic, to our collective successes in moving forward the human rights agenda. But we will not go back. People here are resilient and will continue to fight. We need to work together across borders, forging tighter international connections in order to respond with savvy strategies to these reactionary transnational forces. This is a critical call for global solidarity, mutual global solidarity. We can learn so much from the amazing resiliency of social movements around the world, of women and girls who face huge challenges with incredible vitality and creativity. Together, we can be stronger, we can be smarter, and we can generate joy and energy for the long journey ahead.
Hi everyone, Kath McPhillips from Australia. Just responding to the two questions that Mary has asked us to look at. So the first question's about how we in Australia are experiencing the current US government actions. Well, obviously, we have had major concerns and have been subject, of course, to high-level tariffs and the economic and political instability. But we have watched in the US the censorship of academic voices, the closure of DEI programs, the arrest of that young Turkish woman supporting Palestinians, and the sacking of staff. So it's been very distressing. It was fantastic to see Harvard pushing back and other universities joining in, so I hope that continues. The impacts in Australia are many. So one of the things that happened was that research funding from the US government sector was interrupted, and any grants that involved DEI and social justice were automatically cancelled with no appeal process, of course. There are lots of accounts of people being stopped and interrogated at US borders as they are entering the US from Australia. People are talking about their visas being cancelled. They're sent home with no explanation of why. Some of these people actually live and work in the US, and they have no idea why they can't go back. In Australia itself, universities in the last years have been under significant pressure financially, and many academics are being retrenched from a number of universities. Students have significant pressure with fees and debt, especially post-university, and the humanities and social sciences continued to be devalued with jobs lost in this sector. The impact of the introduction of AI on humanities is just sort of really uncertain at this time. The good news is that in a general election 10 days ago, you probably will have heard that the Labor government has been returned with a vastly increased majority, and the Conservative Party, which was mirroring Trump politics and social division, suffered very heavy losses. So there's a great outcome, and it's given us all a lot of hope. So we followed Canada, and we've followed through Canada in a really thorough rejection of Trump and MAGA policies. For our work together, I think it's really important to keep the international networks alive and active so that we can support each other in our work and resistance to fascism and idiocracy. And also, what support do you need from us in Australia? Because we want to support you and provide solidarity.
I'm coming from Ireland, so I suppose one of the Ireland always had a close relationship with the US, because of our history and immigration of lots of Irish people there. But one of the challenging things that people are finding is that whole sense of a moral bankruptcy, in the United States, and the contribution to really dismantlement of the world order that was established after World War II, because it acts kind of manifestly above and against the law. It's as if there is no other, international platform to which it wants to be accountable to. And that's really scary at the minute, given the war situations around the world. And I suppose the second point is around greed, just the sheer sense of greed for money. And Donald Trump's actions around who he has both in Parliament with him, the kind of people that he surrounds himself with, but also his sense with the arm trade in Saudi Arabia and the gift of a jet or whatever. It's, lured by the wealth. And also his idea of plundering natural resources in other countries, like what kind of a deal he wants to make with Ukraine is not for around peacemaking, but is around trying to gain, the natural resources. And that false narrative, that he promotes about making America great again, which is really about greed, wealth, and a really, really bad, serious divide. And I suppose the increasing thing of racism, polarizations of, groups of peoples, and the widening gap of, rich and poor. And then on a faith level or a church level, how that has fed into right-wing ideologies, especially with Vance, and I suppose, how Vance uses his so-called Catholicism as, feeding into the right, well, they're not so much clear right narratives, like right or left-wing narratives, but I don't know another word for that. I suppose in terms of the Feminist Liberational Network, it's really about strengthening our network and really, I suppose, meeting more just to share our information. And how do we, coming up with strategies about how do we lobby to really put truth to power out there in a way that helps other people understand a more nuanced and deeper analysis of what's really happening, both within the US per se, but its role on an international level. And as people of coming from a values-based perspective or faith perspective, how we kind of link that, especially when there is kind of right-wing narratives or faith that are so destructive.
I am Renate Rose from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm starting with a quote from the Quixote Center, a group of progressive Catholic priests who work mainly for the local communities in Haiti. Heartless disregard for human life and dignity defines the current administration. We are shipping people to the 21st century version of concentration camps and gulags, the prison in El Salvador, without due process or any hope of ever getting out. No other country I know is able that such a thing is happening in the United States, which claims to be a democracy and in fact is not. The Philippines, to my great joy, where I lived for a while, has held its former President Duterte accountable for the murder of thousands of poor people, the so-called drug smugglers. Our president, himself a criminal, is able to continue his unconscionable actions. So what can we do, as you asked? One person or one organization will not have much impact. Therefore, there has to be a global movement, which means all feminist movements need to work together and need to work with those movements who work for non-violence in every regard. That is to say, all the peace movements, the healthcare alliances, like the healthcare nurses, for example, the Red Cross, especially the Center for Nonviolent Communications and the Center for Nonviolent Solutions, the Network for War Resisters, ICAN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, IPPNW, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, etc. It is clear that war is built on patriarchy and hierarchy. All so-called Christian churches must show that Christianity needs to be changed into a radical pacifist religion. Thank you.